Hello, David McMillan here with, I guess we'll call it a short story. It's actually from an old book of mine, which is pretty much out of print, but I thought I'd give you a reading of it, a recollection of it, as best I can. So, it'll come to me, but there'll be a few mistakes. Who cares? Is it any good? I can barely remember it. So, I'll stop fooling around and then tell you of the Scorpion's Dance. Remote in hand. Tuesday had become my day to be cautious. Maybe because the enemy took all Monday to prepare an attack. Maybe because it usually took me until Tuesday to sober up and see the enemy clearly. But this sunny Tuesday in March I felt different. The new house Clelia and I took in beachside Brighton, by the way, that's Brighton in Melbourne, Australia, not Brighton, England. Beachside Brighton had been quietly paid in full. This was 1979, when a sackful of cash turned bank staff a happy red rather than a terrified white. We had no known enemies and business was good. In the dope trade, that alone is reason enough to worry. But it was my personal neighbourhood watch program that changed the mood. I'd had a late start that day. Even though I'd sprung up at the crack of noon as usual, I'd taken an hour after breakfast to help Clelia train her new puppy. The young female, she was never a bitch, German Shepherd, would stare intently at all who looked at her. See how she tilts her head from side to side. Clelia was crouching outside the patio doors, straightening the pup's shoulders every 10 seconds. She's trying to understand our words. I knelt beside Clelia, staring at the mutt. Pup and girl peered into each other's eyes. "Wow, those eyes," she guessed. "Maybe it needs glasses," I said, although I ran my hand around Clelia's waist to take the edge from my sarcasm. We had not long returned from a trip to the Philippines. It had been arranged by Michael, my business partner. Her sister Norma had lived in Manila for 20 years. Apparently she'd been a stunner in her 20s. Over time she came to know everyone important, including Lord Tony Moynihan. He was the disgraced English noble who'd left Britain in a debt and under investigation. Yes, investigation. He'd set up shop in the Philippines, where he gave a warm hand to his fellow countrymen who came seeking opportunity and a taste of risky adventure. Any opportunity belonged to Tony Moynihan, and with his cold hand he would clean them out. Their adventure came later, often in the form of a struggle to rebuild their fortunes and credit. I'd heard he was once part-time spy for MI6 in West Africa. The valuable information he supplied was supposedly the reason he was safe from arrest and deportation. He'd left the UK after his creditors were turning uglier, and there was serious talk of company fraud. Michael had said I had nothing to fear from the fraudster. "You'll be under the care of my sister, and she's very close to Tony. And to Marcos," Michael insisted, "I'd be treated as a friend. He doesn't swindle friends." "Maybe that's because he hasn't got any left," I'd suggested. Manila, Philippines, 1979. After checking into our hotel, Clelia and I taxied to Lord Anthony Moynihan's southern beachside house to be greeted by Tony himself, seated in his office. He was dark-eyed and overweight, yet seemed to move without effort. "Damn sorry no one cleared you through the airport. We've had a busy week, tain't we, Rodrigo?" His lordship had the tone of a tipsy uncle and looked toward a flunky standing by the window and confided, "Rodrigo's my right-hand man. sending a visible twinge along the Filipino employee's arm. Make sure our new friends are taken care of when they leave. I'd flown from Melbourne for just one purpose, to ask Tony to secure some special containers that might arrive from Thailand. The containers would be packed with that unique form of Thai marijuana known as Thai sticks. I'd hoped Tony could have the containers cleared and then rebooked as local Philippine produce. Or better still, from a customs-clean country. As soon as I could get a word in, I talked shipping. "Tony, can I call you that?" I asked. "I've seen one ship that stops here from the United States and goes on to Sydney. Maybe we could see our containers loaded as from America. Towels or other cotton goods would work." Tony had other plans. Sure. Not a problem. Ever seen a cockfight here? They're quite a show. And some big money changes hands. A couple of thousand rich Chinese betting as though there's no tomorrow. I've been told you're a master of electronics. If you could dream up some way of fixing the fight. The next day, Rodrigo took Clelia and me to a huge pen. Tony was busy elsewhere. "A secret business," Rodrigo had said, stroking the side of his nose. "What, Marcos, he doesn't know?" President Marcos had been the effective dictator of the Philippines for over 15 years. He held power until 1986, when a televised assassination of his opponent resulted in Ferdinand and Madame Marcos leaving the country on one-way tickets to Hawaii. Live television brought the end to half the world's dictators in the 1980s. In the crowded and noisy cockfighting barn, Rodrigo had to yell every word into my ear to be heard. "You like Lord Tony?" Rodrigo screamed. "He'd keep everything secret." Screaming. Tony's secrets were probably of no interest to the 500 or 600 Chinese Filipinos in the huge henhouse that day, but there were more than a few Hispanic Filipinos taking an interest in us. The fighting cocks were fitted with sharp 6-inch curved blades on their legs. The fights were often over in seconds, concealed in a flurry of dust and feathers. A ringmaster called the fights. The betters cursed, called bets throughout, threw fistfuls of sweaty banknotes around and lost with tremendous enthusiasm. "Which one was our bird?" asked Clelia. I couldn't see. I cupped my hand to Clell's ear. "If it's a stir-fry for dinner, then our bird lost." In Tony's house that night, over the paw fruit entree, I gave my opinion of rigging the cockfight. "We can't win. It's over too quickly, no matter how well we kit out our chook. He could drop his comb in half a second before he gets a chance to use any secret weapon." The soon-to-be-dumped Mrs. Tony, a 40-plus woman called Luzgarra Maria Beltran da Rosa, looked alarmed. Lord Tony held the same smile that he'd worn since I arrived. I then played my card. "The answer is to kill our own bird. If you can bet on the other bird to win, I can give you an 80% chance that our broiler will drop dead 15 seconds into the fight." Mrs. Tony was excited, happy, and doubtful all at once. It was putting stress on her facelifts, those old chins trembling beneath the new layer. "But how can you do that?" she demanded. Lord Tony waved a calming hand at her, but looked to me. "I'm sure you can tell us." I explained that it would not be easy, but since our cock would be the loser, any post-mortem examination would be in our hands. "I noticed you can't always see the death blow," I told the dinner guests, "because of those long, thin blades. In many cases it was difficult to see the wounds on the bird, especially with a slash into a large vein or a heart jab. Poison would be too slow, and even a top marksman would have trouble targeting those fast-moving cocks. Yet you haven't told us how it can be done. Lord Tony's smile was becoming as brittle as his passport. He stubbed out his cigar with force. The nervy Lady Moynihan had something to offer. Rodrigo says a rifleman in the army freezes liquid cyanide like ice, cold enough to fire into a steel tin, she said proudly, challenging me to do better. Tony was annoyed with loose interruptions. "And I know a barman in London who can kill with pink gin," Tony snapped. "I'm sure we'll be told in good time." There's just the small chance our bird could lash out in the last seconds of his life and blindly kill his competitor. But I think not too often. I've finished with growing energy despite myself. At first I thought the whole idea foolish, yet I could not resist thinking it through. This particular weakness would cost me dearly a few years later. You would need a beard to place your bets, so you'll really need to find someone who can keep a secret. Tony's expression changed at the mention of bets. His eyes narrowed, and he leaned to Mrs. Tony, calming her. Clelia whispered to me, "A beard? They'd need someone else, so they wouldn't be seen placing the bets against their own, no doubt, champion chook," I explained, and then asked Clelia to keep a woman's eye on Mrs. T. Before I could say more, the cook's assistant brought in the main course, a roast, a whole roast chicken. Clelia paled. I leant to her and spoke quietly. "No stir-fry. We must have won the fight." The next Friday, Clelia went shopping with the womenfolk, something she usually hated. She preferred children, and there were few in the Moynihan encampment. She'd agreed, as I wanted to get away on my own. I had the name and number of the father of a young Filipino cameraman who had studied and worked in London before moving to Australia to settle. We'd met when I was in the UK in 1977. He'd said so many good things about his dad, I kept the number he'd pressed upon me. I had a meal at the old man's house. We talked about old cameras, new work, and things I'd been away from for many years. He'd heard of Lord Moynihan, although they'd never met. Nando, called Old Pop by his son, sat back in his comfortable but broken armchair and scratched his shiny head. "There used to be a lot of what you call wide boys when I was at the studio," Old Pop paused, maybe unsure about giving away thoughts. "They expected this man to live maybe in one of two ways, like some Nazi on the run, or then the new tough guy. But no, he doesn't have any business with local people, not Philippine people anyway." I looked around the living room. Almost every flat surface had framed pictures of friends and what looked like family. I realized then that Lord Tony's house had none of that. Only one professional shot of his kids and 3 of Tony with President Marcos or Mrs. Marcos. Bringing my mind back to where I was, I asked old Pop Nando about the cockfights. "You think many people put bets on from the outside, like with a bookie?" Nando toyed with the gift I'd sent, a director's viewfinder lens. The box with the lens had been air expressed from Sydney and contained the wireless remote camera button I'd asked for. "Like I say, I don't go much," he said. "But it's not a thing to read in the papers, not like the horses. You want to be there for the action." Which was just where Tony did not want to be. It's not that I mind Norma drinking all day, Clelia began to pace our hotel room, or even that horrible Luth woman stopping at every shoe store. I'm just hoping it's worth it. Michael Sullivan's sister, Norma, was a dedicated alcoholic, with the advantage that she forgot everything by midday, so she could never testify. But the disadvantage that everyone was a good guy, which meant much time wasted on scoundrels. Tony's Argentinian wife, Luth, was trying to get respectable by imitating Prez Marcos's wife, who owned over 3,000 pairs of shoes, a hard record to top. She's an ambitious woman. When Tony had to get out of London in the late 60s, she was well marked for a pinch too. Only a few more days, I assured her. I'll get Lord Tony onto the shipping lanes tonight or sink. Clelia sat on the edge of the bed in silence. I sat next to her and whispered, "That Luth has so many facelifts she has to shave twice a week." I offered a grin. No good. Clelia leant back on her hands. "There was a time long ago," I kept on, "when that woman had more chins than the Chinese telephone book." And that did it. Clelia's smile started to make sounds. Tony was on the phone when a servant allowed me into his office. "Yes, General, that won't be a problem." Tony cupped the receiver and waved me to a chair. He was at it again, staging fake phone calls. "I'll make sure your whiz-bangs are in A1 condition." I began to tread water. Rodrigo was staring through the office window. Tony whispered to him loudly, "Rigo, get the Learjet on standby. The General's going over the top." "I'll come back when you're not busy." I stood and turned. "No, please don't." Tony stopped the theatrics. "It's just I feel like I can say anything in front of you." I was then assured I'd be given funding for my research into the Killer Cock scheme, and that I wouldn't have to put up a penny. That Tony would give me a 30% share of the winnings. "And those will be?" I asked. Tony stood and sat on the corner of his desk. He took a fat cigar from his personal box and narrowed his eyes at me, speaking low. "We don't bet much. Maybe we lose 1 or 2. Tony tilted his head back and forward before disagreeing with himself. "But we soon enough bet big." "All on 1. I nodded. "So big means how much?" $500,000. Cash, of course. He held a match to his cigar. The idea of betting against a boundful of streetwise Chinese over the fall of a cock, hearts beating at 300 per minute, seemed, well, the original cockamamie scheme, but I had no other angle to rein in this born con artist. I struck a bargain for my shipping containers. "Your Lordship, Tony, here's the deal. If you take my plan and you like it, will you do my work? Clear my containers from Thailand, give them a fresh bill of lading from America, send them on their way. Do you agree?" Tony half nodded, returning to his chair, dreaming of games of chance and cash cases. He puffed his cigar, his concentration far away. I flipped the pack of cigarettes I held. The room sparked with light. On top and beneath the light, a loud snap like a tree branch was heard. I saw Tony's face was splattered with blood, his neckline gleaming red. Rodrigo looked on astonished. Tony's eyes held on the remains of his cigar, now a fragmented stub glued to his fingers. I leaned forward and spoke evenly. Here and now, that cigar held only a capsule of stage blood, shredded paper for fragments, and a percussion cap, trimmed end and channeled forward so you'd not be hurt, anything more than a loud noise. And a tiny coil and capacitor. It's a thing that was developed to keep a number tag inside PETs so it can be read by a scanner. Rodrigo slowly stood but kept back. Tony was now paying attention. I spoke again. To kill our bird, we take advantage of the loose scruff of skin around the cock's neck. We insert a 000 size capsule into the neck. The capsule would contain a basic high-frequency receiver like this and just enough explosive to sever the jugular vein and traumatize the spinal nerve. If this cigarette pack transmitter I used is fitted with a body-wrapped antenna, we can kill from 200 yards. Our chameleon cock will fall over within 4 seconds. I wasn't sure if I'd overdone it. I spoke louder. Anthony Patrick Andrew Cairns Barclay, the 3rd Baron Moynihan. Do we have a deal? It seems we did. So, was there a happy ending to our thriller in Manila? Did I train up Rodrigo to waste a trio of sinewy cocks by remote while Tony raked in the cash? Were my containers of Thai marijuana on the high seas? The conman is not happy unless he cons with a sting. If the target were faceless numbers on some insurance roll, to him the score would be dry and without taste. For the conman, the flavour is in the double cross, and the richness is in the victim's expressions of betrayal. But how and why? We had a thing going on, cried the cheated to the joy of the cheater. I didn't have time to explain much to Clelia until we left the Philippines. By the time our jet had reached 30,000 feet, I told her the heart of it. So that's why you changed our tickets to a day earlier. Clelia understood. You didn't want that Rodrigo to see us through the airport. Tony never knew my troubling name. I tapped my genuinely faked Australian passport. But you're on your own name, and I didn't want to split up. Clelia tilted her chair back and closed her eyes. When did you know it was a scam? The moment he said, perhaps you'd like to put some of your own money in at the end. That killed it for me. The lushly Norma slipped up too. Clelia opened her eyes. How? I told Clelia of the time when Norma had admitted telling Tony we, Michael and I, had great piles of money from the trade, dope, and maybe we could get villas here and invest in a bar or a restaurant. 200,000 or 300,000 investment, Michael's sister slurred the details. There was no talk of it, and Norma claimed she'd no memory of it, I told Clelia. Well, the drink, very convenient for lost memories, but probably true, so why did Tony drop the idea? Before I'd left Manila, I'd confronted Tony in a silly hope of turning things around. I suppose everything has some kind of explanation, I began easily. You claim to be an honest crook, but steer clear of the local guns. Your guests are foreign expats, but they don't seem to be keeping in touch. The phone's always one-sided. Tony began to throw up his hands. Now, David, yes, nothing in each of those things by itself, but you've got me in as an electronics expert. Yet acted though you don't care if I can turn on a light bulb. I trailed off, allowing Tony's face to implicate itself. It did, and it bothered him. He shot back. "You've been riding close to the wind for quite some time, my dear David." Tony's head tilted. "All those identities, passports. Yours is a dangerous game." "And not for you," I accused him. "I didn't say that," Tony said. "But you did, just now." I shook my head. "Someone told me about the bank scam a nightclub owner fell into last year. If that's your game, fine. It's just not mine." Tony squinted with irritation. "You shouldn't listen to all you hear. That story was from the old guy who went out of his way to send his copy of the Sting, wasn't it? That man who was no friend to you or me." Tony must have had a long arm in my hotel room. Old Pop Nando had sent me the tape of the classic conman betting scam. I'd flushed his note, but his name was on the courier docket. "And I am?" I asked. "Your friend?" It was over. There was no turning back. "If you change your mind about the shipping, let me know," I offered. "By the way, I bug the containers too. It tells me if they are opened on arrival and what people say. We fly out Thursday. Let me know by then if you feel different." The last thing I did before flying out on the Wednesday was to mail Nando's VHS copy of The Sting. It was a personal memento of happier days for him in the film business. Old Pop's tape had been signed by one of the film's photography team. I left my remote-controlled detonator and exploding caps in the concrete air vents that passed through the hotel's air conditioning system. I had no doubt that Lord Tony would have claimed my device was working whatever happened. He even seemed impressed at one time. Probably saw real life in the Great Chicken Swindle for the first time. If our Lord Tony was really impressed, why didn't he go for it, for real? This was Clelia asking that morning at home in Melbourne with her new puppy. Why not let you rig the cockfight? I stood up and stretched. For one simple reason. He could never place the bet. Apparently no one bets outside of the pit, even if they bet big, and they never bet that big. Even with a front man, a beard, and no beard stays secret for long in Manila, no one would ever take more than 20,000-30,000 on a fight. I don't know why Tony didn't pull me into some investment swindle. A club, hotel, something like that. The swindler's impatience, I thought. I went back to work. Another courier run, interlocked with the one after. By the third round trip, I would have the dope packed and ready from the previous visit. And by then, the money would have paid for the gold chain from Bangkok's gold market, bought by my Thai partner Lee, that would serve to cover the Australian end costs. On my return from Europe, we were to buy high-quality, pea-sized 1-carat diamonds to sell in Australia. A cycle that provided a good defence should the unthinkable happen. A surprise bust. Everyone among our little crew had made 5 or 6 trips and needed fresh passports, including me. I had so many of the little travel books I'd run out of birth certificates in Victoria and had to fly to another state to sit in the records office for most of the day, searching for small tragedies that leave names without a life. A life I was happy to give them. Something more than 3 weeks had passed when the post arrived with a book-sized parcel bearing Philippine stamps. Irritatingly, unopened by customs, it contained a plastic-wrapped copy of The Sting. On a note held by adhesive tape was scribbled, No hard feelings. Tea. I smiled. Perhaps Tony was not so obsessed. Another Tuesday, another small event. My neighbour was a retired policeman. Quite often I saw him at the front door of our house, nosing around. As I left the house around 11, I saw him watering his patch of grass at his footpath. It had rained the night before. The patch was sodden, now damaged. But not from the rain, from the hour he must have put in waiting. I walked around to give him the opportunity to say his bit. Another late start, he said. Work the night shift? The pensioner plodder looked at our expensive house, sniffed resentfully at the renovations outside and in, and glared at me. Night shift? I went to his point. Would pay for all of this? No. Would it? Restaurant. Come down sometime. I walked to my car adding, have a big meal on the fucking house. Privately. I reprimanded myself for being prideful and careless, but even so, drove away smiling. My personal neighborhood watch was to keep an eye out for cops. It was that week I spoke to Quinny. He was the settled and very Australian by then son of old Pop Nando. His dad had died of heart failure a few days before. I'm going for the funeral, but I feel bad you saw him last before me, he said. Later, I wandered to the bookshelf at the back of the house behind my office. I bought the Carlton Terrace house from some architects who renovated the old shop and dwelling into such plush comfort that I could rarely get beyond lunch without falling into a severe nap, as Michael called them. Sofas surrounding a garden atrium, open fires here and there. Well, it was either the comfort or the drugs and booze I'd hit before noon. From the bookshelf, I took the video copy of The Sting that a more relaxed Lord Tony had sent me. I tore off the plastic wrapper. I'd guessed Tony had bought a copy after he thought of sending me a note. I still hadn't guessed how he'd found my address. Hello, Norma. Gin? Michael said no, never given it out. On the back of the tape, there was a partly torn label. Brown Productions. Looking closely, I could see a signature had been torn away. Only Nastasio remaining. I called an agent for Variety magazine. The tape was an insider's promotional copy. This was old Pop's tape, one I'd returned to him, one that Lord Tony had somehow taken in hand. And the old man was dead. Maybe Tony wasn't so relaxed about being tagged and rebuffed. I said nothing to Clelia, although hinted at taking another vacation sometime when things slowed. By the time of the Brighton house in Montclair Avenue, I'd set up a small room dedicated to electronic listening and small devices to make life more private. Sometimes I'd listen to the Victoria Police surveillance operations on the scanners. A favourite station for late listening was the channel the undercover or surveillance police used at the time. It was on 168.675 megacycles. One could hear little dramas being played out in real life. Cops and Robbers as a radio reality show. I'd crook friends who found themselves obsessed with listening. Baggy-eyed and tired, they say dawn, unable to tear themselves away from their Bearcat 120s, the radio of choice early on. I only listened briefly when necessary. There was often the temptation to intervene on the side of the black hats when the opposition were closing in for the kill. That was not as easy to do as you might think. This Tuesday afternoon, I arrived home around 5. I patted Clelia and kissed the dog, then checked in on my little listening station. Speaking from the desk loudspeaker, as though in the same room, were the voices of the watchers, code-talking unnamed people, often part-time cops, friends of cops, and would-be cops, tucked in their cars. "Anybody know what he looks like?" said a man's voice. I checked the radio frequency. Yeah, 168,625. Then another voice. "I've got a picture here, not so clear, from a PP copy." So at least two of them, and the operation was young, maybe just a day old. These guys had little idea of their target, not much of a briefing either. It seemed as though they'd been rushed in. I called to Clelia. "Chloe, you wouldn't believe it, a big operation right around here." I grabbed a handheld scanner and quickly tuned it in. I didn't think there were many people like us around here. Clelia was folding washing and looking at the TV, not interested. I grabbed a coat and my car keys. "I'm going out to look. Not too close. I'll drive around to the grocery shop and back, so I'll blend in," I said. "I'm going to help this time. Warn the poor guy." "Bring home some milk." Clelia had lost any enthusiasm for my toys by then. I slid into my Ford LTD on the driveway. I'd bought it a few weeks ago. An anonymous light brown, it was a luxury car that should go unnoticed. The police radio had gone quiet. I hoped they'd not all moved on. Sitting in my car, in the driveway, I activated the remote for the garage door and slipped the paddle into reverse. "Okay, he's coming out now," said a man's voice from my handset. "Keep your positions." With a bit of luck, I thought. I was in time for the action. The target was just now on the move. I should keep back, but cars going much too slow and noticed almost as quickly as speeders. I eased out backward, looking to one side. "He stopped halfway out," said voice number one. "What's he doing, going back?" "Has he spotted something?" said voice number two. "No, he's moving, slow, maybe, I don't know," said voice number one. "It's okay, he's driving steady." A third voice, a woman, spoke. "He's turning the corner, not fast maybe, going to the shop," she suggested. "Looks a bit sick. Is there a pharmacy up there?" Ashen-faced, I drove to the small grocery and paper shop, where I bought many things. I don't recall what they were. Clelia wasn't pleased to hear what I'd brought home. "They're on us," I announced. "Cops, the Jacks." 6 cars I can see, the shadows. Clelia sighed as though I'd brought home something that needed cleaning and feeding, but would still be an ugly beast. And it was. Oh, there you are. That's a little slice of life from back in Australia, when I detected that after being invisible for quite a long time, I'd been spotted. By the way, the reason the police came to me was not entirely due to my neighbour, but due to a statement from one of the couriers. I think I can tell you. It was Sue Knoll. No, she wasn't really believed, you know. She said she'd been a courier, been paid a lot of money, all of that. They hear that kind of thing all the time. But they kept it on file. And when my good neighbour mentioned me, funding was arranged. Something you never want. Not in your enemy, anyway. See you soon.